2022 may have just started, but that doesn't mean that there's a shortage of online Pokemon tournaments for us to talk about some matchup data, and that's what we're doing today. Hey everybody, Nick from 9Card TCG, and today, we're doing matchup data because it's that time of the month, and we might as well, right? So, there's been a fair amount of tournaments. We're going to talk about, in 2022, there have been 9 60-plus person tournaments, and I think 60, while it's an arbitrary number, is a pretty good showing. Obviously, not every tournament has to be as big as Zach Lesage's late night series with 300-plus people. That's crazy how many people attend those things, but I think 60 is a good showing for a deck's potential, and so that's the kind of cutoff we did. In 2022, there have been 9, I have my notes right here, there have been 9 60-plus person events in the past few days. Now, Mew has won 3 of those. Single Strike has won 1, Rapid Strike won one as well. Doraleodon and Gengar each won 1, and Sableye and Teleon took 2. So, interesting decks taking some top spots. We're not really surprised about Mew. We're not really surprised about the Urshifus. Doraleodon is a little shocking, and you'll see why it is when we talk about the data. And Sableye and Teleon, again, kind of creeping back up into popularity. It was really popular a couple months ago, fell off, and now is picking back up with some real success. So let's get into the actual matchup data. But before we do, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, bell notification, leave a comment, like, all that kind of stuff. Those tell YouTube this is a good video and other people should watch it. One of the reasons you might want to subscribe to the channel is because we're doing a giveaway. Giving away an Urshifu VMAX League Battle Decks with some bonus damage dice because these things never come with enough. You can sleeve it up in these beautiful Dragon Shield matte sleeves, and then you can protect it all with this nice magnetic closure deck box. And I also have a playmat coming, an Ultra Pro playmat. It just hasn't arrived yet, but I promise it's part of the giveaway, and you have until tomorrow to enter. And so how do you enter? Well, there's a video right here and in the video description. Check it out. Figure out how to enter. It's really easy. You comment on that video, and that's all you have to do. But you have until January 5th at 12 p.m. Eastern. That's when I'm drawing the winner. So, if you haven't, please do enter. I want 2022 to be the year that someone starts playing the Pokemon trading card game. Ideally, this giveaway will go to someone who has never played the game before and is looking to get into it, or has taken an extended break, it doesn't have any cards from the most recent sets, and like I said, wants to get back into the game and needs a starting point. So, with all that, it's one of those days I just can't talk today. With all that out of the way, let's go check out some matchup data. Here we are at Trainer Hill, and you'll notice that we have 11 decks to look at today, and I do have the minimum game set to 1. You can't see it because my stupid face is blocking it, but it's set to 1. It's just because some of these decks haven't been played a ton in tournaments, and we don't have a lot of data, so to minimize blank spots, I kind of had to do it. Do keep in mind a couple of things, that the deck on the left here with the asterisk is the deck that has the win percentage. So for example, this Calyrex and Teleon, which refers to Ice Rider, beats Doraleodon about 69% of the time. Nice. And they've had 13 matches played. So that's how we're going to read this. Also keep in mind that the decks that I chose here are considered to be the top decks in the format according to different meta and standard analyses from people like Zach Lesage, Justin Basil, and of course my own opinions and thoughts on these decks based on what I see in the meta. So it's a big, hodgepodge of information. So let's dive right into the data and start talking about Ice Rider. Ice Rider beats Doraleodon almost 70% of the time, which is a great number. We've talked about that number before. 66% is the number that you want to see if you had to choose, because that means in a best of 3 scenario, you are likely to win that round, right? 66% is 2 out of 3, so that's the number you want to hit. So Ice Rider beats Doraleodon most of the time. It does lose to Gengar. It loses to Jolteon really hard, mostly because Jolteon is going to be picking apart your bench, your Sobbles, and your Drizziles so that you can't find the consistency pieces that you need, like your Buckets and your Melonies, to continually attack after discarding the energies with Max Lance. It also is going to put a lot of pressure on secondary Calyrexes that you have on the bench, so really difficult matchup there. You do also lose to Mew. You beat Sableye, but this is only 2 matches, so I don't really care about this data. You do lose, you're favored against Suicune and Ludicolo. You beat Urshifu Umbreon about 66% of the time, again, our magic number. You are going to be losing to Rapid Strike again. They're going to be picking apart the bench. Although, in all fairness, 47% is pretty neutral, so I tend to consider somewhere between like 45 and 55 in that range to be a pretty neutral matchup. And then Victini, you are beating mostly because you're hitting for weakness, but you're still even hitting their entire deck for weakness, not even 66%, which kind of tells you a little bit something about Victini and how annoying it can really be. Doraleodon is next, and Doraleodon is a crazy example of how statistical information, there's a phrase that we use, statistics don't apply to the individual. And what that means is, yesterday, I was playing in Zach Lesage's event, the late night series, and my first opponent was playing Mew, and he played a bunch of coin flips. In that game, he flipped 6 coins. 5 of them were heads, and you're like, well, statistically, only 3 of them should be heads. But each individual flip is a 50-50 chance. So just because the first 3 were heads does not mean the next 3 will be tails. That's not how statistics work. So you have to consider that each individual event has its own odds associated with it. Now, obviously, if you extend that to 100, you're likely to hit that 50-50 ratio. But in a small sample of only 6 flips, it's not really unsurprising that they're going to hit a fair amount of them. So keep that all in mind. Statistics don't apply to the individual. Why do I bring all that up? Well, Duraludon's matchup data is pretty bad. I mean, it loses to Ice Rider. It beats Gengar, but that's, I think, only a couple of matches. It's 7 matches. It beats Gengar 100% of the time. It loses to Jolteon. It loses to Mew. It's even with Suicune Ludicolo. It loses to Single Strike. It beats Rapid Strike. And it loses to Victini. So really the decks it's beating are Urshifu, Rapid Strike, and Gengar. That's it. Urshifu, beating Rapid Strike is a big deal. It's a pretty common deck. It's usually in the top 3-4 most popular decks in the game. But when most of the decks played, somewhere between 1-4 and 1-5 decks are Mew, and you're losing to that deck, and then you're losing to the second most common deck, which is Jolteon. You're losing to the third most or fourth most common deck, which is Single Strike. Beating the number 4 most common deck is not really that big of a deal, considering that it generally is 8% of the meta, something like that. So it doesn't really matter too much. And Gengar's even less than that. So how Duraludon won a 120-person event is miraculous, just if you were to look at the data. But do keep things in mind that you, as an individual, might pilot the deck very differently than someone else who played poorly with that deck. You might be playing opponents who you have good matchups against, or don't know how to combat something like Duraludon. Maybe you're playing a Mew player who hasn't had a lot of experience with Duraludon. They run themselves out of energies or switches, and now you just bossed off your game, and there's nothing they can do about it. That's how I've won my games with Duraludon versus Mew. So things like that, just because you see matchup data it's not a predictor of how your specific performance was. It just shows historical data and what you may expect if you were to play this deck. So am I saying you shouldn't play Duraludon? Absolutely not. I got my butt kicked by one because the person who I played intelligently. They saw I was playing Single Strike. Turn 2, they were able to get their Duraludon VMAX, and they benched no other Pokemon. Now, I made a silly misplay, but that's not the point. They played really intelligently, and they didn't give me other targets to start gusting up and taking knockouts so I can get my prize cards to fix my mistake. The mistake really quickly was I discarded my Urshifu VMAX not knowing I prized my other one. I had a pretty dead hand, so I had to choose. Do I play a Capture Energy onto a Pokemon that's not an Urshifu? Or do I research my VMAX and hope the other one's in the deck without checking by using something like Capture Energy? I took the risk. I knew the risk that I was taking. I knew that if I did prize my other VMAX, I would lose the game. And I did. And so I lost. And that's just how the game goes. So, but they recognized that I was stuck. And they played really well. So just because Single Strike Urshifu, it says that you're going to only win 1 out of 3 times. Well, hey, that's the 1 out of 3 that they won. Or, I mean, they might have won more. I actually don't know. But you get the point. I talked about Doraleodon too much. Let's move on. Clarion Wheezing. I'm not 100% sure I picked the right Clarion Wheezing. But it also doesn't have particularly great matchups. It beats Gengar. It's losing to Jolteon. It's losing to Mew. I think only played 1 game. Yeah, 1 game against Sableye, so we're not counting that. It beats Suicune, and it loses to both Urshifus. Victini was also just 1 game. So not really counting the 1 games that statistically insignificant. And yeah, Clarion Wheezing, really interesting. It beats Gengar, but again, and it beats Suicune. But both of those decks don't have high meta share percentages, so it's not that impressive or big of a deal. Moving on to Gengar, maybe one of the more popular decks that people are interested in hearing about. Neutral with Ice Rider. It loses to Doraleodon. It loses to Clarion Wheezing. It's neutral with itself and Jolteon. It beats Mew about 58% of the time. It's pretty even with Suicune and Single Strike. It loses extremely hard to Rapid Strike, and it beats Victini. I mean, yeah, Victini, it's a good deck to beat, but not that popular. You're losing to Rapid Strike Urshifu, which is pretty popular. You're neutral with Single Strike, again, pretty popular. You beat Mew. That's like the one thing that's really keeping this deck going, is the fact that you are favored against Mew. And when you play 4 games or 5 games and you're hitting a couple of Mews in those handful of games, that's some wins in your favor. And that's really the thing keeping Gengar afloat, in my opinion. And the fact that you're neutral against Single Strike. But and Jolteon. So you're neutral against 2 of the 3 most popular decks. You lose to the 3rd or 4th most popular deck, and you're a little favored against the most popular deck. I mean, yeah, Gengar's doing all right. Jolteon historically has had some of the highest number of favored matchups out of every deck we've looked at. And in previous weeks, it was 7. So let's see if it still meets that or lives up to that. So right off the bat, we have 3, 4, 5. We just have 5 this time. So interestingly enough, it's obviously going to beat Calyrex. We talked about that. It beats Doraleodon. It beats Clarion Wheezing. It loses, or it's pretty neutral to Mew. It's losing to Sableye. It's beating Suicune. Again, you're hitting Suicune for weakness. And it loses to both Urshifus and is favored against Victini. So not as good as we've seen in the past. It also looks like, and I'm kind of going off memory here, I think it's about the same win percent against Single Strike, about 40%, which is still pretty good for a deck that is putting out massive numbers and also you're weak too. So really impressive. It's really just a statement of how reliant Single Strike is on Houndoom. And if Single Strike can get going quickly, you're not winning. If they're stuck and they can only get 1 Houndoom out, now you have a pretty good shot. So not Jolteon's fault, but it's really just dependent on how well Single Strike sets up. If Single Strike sets up, there not many decks are really going to beat it. Maybe Mew, because you're hitting Urshifu for weakness, and that Meloetta is just crazy good. But aside from that, if Single Strike sets up, it's a tough deck to beat. Mew is Mew, right? There's a reason why it's 20% of the meta. There's a reason why it's winning so many events. It's beating 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It has 6 positive matchups, and those are Calyrex, Doraleodon, which Doraleodon's really interesting historically, or I shouldn't say historically, it's not like, it's been like 2 weeks, but when Doraleodon first kind of crept up as like a silent Mew killer, it worked really well because Mew players handled it like every other deck. They just drew their entire thing, got rid of a bunch of resources, started spreading energies out, and next thing you know, they're like, oh wait, I can't attack this thing. Oh wait, I can't get my Genesect out of the active. They're discarding my special energies with Flannery. They're discarding my energies with Crushing Hammers. I have only 2 basic Psychic energies. I can't even, they're spread out. I put one on a Mew and one on a Meloetta. There's nothing I can do now. Or something like that. So now Mew players, when they see Doraleodon, started to wise up a little bit. But yeah, you're still losing about a third of the time, which is not as much as you'd hope to. Again, I don't know if that's just people piloting Doraleodon poorly. I don't know if that's Doraleodon sometimes being a little slow to get going. Whatever it is, or if it's just Mew being incredibly fast. So it could be a couple of different things. So you're also slightly favored against Clarion Wheezing. You're slightly favored against Jolteon. You are beating Suicune. You're beating Single Strike 45% of the time. So you're pretty neutral against Single Strike. It's really just a matter of, does Single Strike get set up? Do they know how to handle your Meloetta? If they do, you're in trouble. If they don't set up or they don't know how to deal with Meloetta, you're kind of in trouble. It also really depends on how you set up your Single Strike energies, or your Fusion Strike energies. If you put them, 2 onto Meloetta, and they get knocked out because of a Houndoom, or they get knocked out because of an Umbreon, you might be in a little bit of trouble, but, that's your problem. I have zero sympathy for when a Mew player loses, so, and you do beat Rapid Strike Urshifu decisively, and you lose to Victini, and part of the reason is because Victini not only has that energy disruption, but unless you can nail a bunch of power tablets, you're not taking the one-shot on Victini VMAX, and they are one-shotting your Genesects. They're going to be able to gust up those Genesects, eat them up. They're doing massive damage to Genesects, and now you're losing your draw supports, so maybe it's a little harder to find your power tablets because you don't have those Genesects. They can also gust up, using Boss's Orders, a benched Mew, Meloetta, something that has like those Single Strike energies, start Crushing Hammers and Fan of Waves, your other ones. They can be really annoying for Mew, so I can definitely see how Victini can win. That's actually not really surprising the more I think about it, that you only beat Mew about 1 out of 3. It makes perfect sense. Sableye Inteleon is interesting. It's won a couple of tournaments recently. It won a 300-plus person tournament just on January 2nd, or January 1st, whatever it is, which is crazy to me. Its matchup spreads are really interesting. I mean, you're beating Jolteon, you're beating Wheezing, and that's about it. That's like it. But somehow it's winning. Now, again, like with Clarion Wheezing, is this the right Sableye Inteleon? I have no idea. How many matches does this have with Mew? Sableye Inteleon Mew. It only has 12 matches. But, it hasn't been played a ton since Mew came out, so I really don't know if this is the right one. But it's a good deck. I mean, it's winning. It's winning, and if it's not winning, it's in top 12, top 16. So it's definitely, its presence is being felt, and it's a little annoying. It does lose to Rapid Strike, and it's pretty neutral with Single Strike, mostly because Single Strike's really dependent on Single Strike Roar. So if you can get your Clarion Wheezing out into the active, it can be really annoying. But yeah, this is it's a really weird time for the meta. Seeing Victini, Sableye, this Galarian Moltres, build and stuff. There's some weird single prize decks going around too. Suicune Ludicolo, not much has really changed. I mean, the things that it beats, it's going to beat Sableye, but it's only 3 matches. It's beating Single Strike. It's really no one's surprise. And it beats Victini. You are hitting Victini for weakness. So even though they do one-shot your Suicunes, if you don't have a Cape of Toughness, you are going to be one-shotting their VMAXs. So you are taking those up trades. And that's why you're able to win so decisively. Single Strike, my personal favorite deck, and the one that I play the most, has 5 favorite matchups, and it's neutral with a couple of things. It's neutral with Victini, and it's neutral with Sableye Inteleon, so it still is pretty neutral with Gengar. The reason why it's so neutral against something like Victini is that, well, Victini is really easy to knock out with Gmax 1 blow, and it's just a matter of, again, can Single Strike get set up? If it does, it's winning. If it doesn't, it's losing. That's just really how that deck works. And do I like having like a high risk, high reward deck? Not so much. I would like it to be a little bit more consistent. I'm kind of hoping that Ultra Ball comes around and can really bring out a little bit of consistency. We can get rid of some things like those Battle VIP passes after turn 1 that we don't need to find the Houndoom, to find the Urshifu VMAX, or whatever it is that we need. Just a little bit extra consistency. There was a list that won or did really well with the Pyukumuku. I said that really weird. And it's interesting because it lets you put it to the bottom of the deck, draw an extra card. So it's like a card that you can search with Quick Ball and then put it back into the bottom of the deck to draw an extra card. And sometimes that's all you need, is to draw one more card. I've been there 1,000 times with Single Strike, but I don't know how good that really is, because there can be times where it's like, I really don't need this Pyukumuku. Like, you're drawing it to draw one extra card. And it's like, well, what if I just drew that extra card without the Pyukumuku? You know, is this worth having? So not really sure. Rapid Strike Urshifu has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So far, Rapid Strike Urshifu has the most favored matchups. It's beating Ice Rider. It's beating Clarion Wheezing. It's really kicking Gengar's butt. It beats Jolteon decisively. It beats Sableye. It's favored against Single Strike, and it beats Victini. So Rapid Strike Urshifu is probably one of the best decks in the game. It's just, it's really brought down by the fact that Mew is Psychic, and it's weak to Psychic. And if it wasn't weak to Psychic, or if Mew was a different type or whatever, I mean, this deck would just be all over the place. It is there was a tournament, I don't remember how many people were in it. There were 173 people, but Mew VMAX was banned, and Rapid Strike Urshifu won, and that's not surprising. Look at the matchup spreads. It's beating a lot of stuff. What is it not beating? It's not beating Doraleodon. Rapid Strike Urshifu is highly dependent on that Rapid Strike energy, so if you can't attack, I mean, you could be going back and forth with Gale Thrust, but they're probably running hammers, and once they get rid of your couple of basic fighting energies, you're in a lot of trouble. It's not beating Mew. Obviously, you're getting hit for weakness really, really hard. It's not beating Suicune and Ludicolo. That's just a tough deck for a lot of 3 prizers, because they're going to be taking that up trade. It's going to be neutral trades. They can knock out your Vs. They do max 220s. Rapid Strike Urshifu has 220 HP. They can also gust up some other stuff to make the prize trade or prize race a little bit faster, knock out a V, knock out a Sobble, and then Rare Candy, Ludicolo, Enthusiastic Dance, knock out a VMAX, boom, game's over. So, yeah, Suicune and Ludicolo is really tough for 3 prize decks to handle. And that's really it. Like, those are the decks that you're losing to. And the only reason you really lose to Mew is weakness. Genesect only has 190 HP, so if you weren't getting hit for weakness, you would have a pretty good time with those Genesects. Last deck we're going to talk about is Victini. Now, obviously, we've talked about Victini already, but in the inverse. Victini is beating Doraleodon because they can take advantage of the fire weakness of Zacian and Zamazenta. They also just generally don't run a lot of special energies. Sure, they might have some heat energies, but they don't have to use them. They also beats the Clarion Wheezing, but I think that's just one match, so we don't care. Loses to Gengar, which is not really surprising. Gengar, like Single Strike Urshifu, can hit for really high numbers really easily. Victini VMAX only has 310 HP, so hitting that 310 mark just requires 3 Single Strike energies. And Gengar VMAX is not going to get counter KO'd the next turn. So if Gengar attacks first, knocks out a VMAX, half the game's over. They just have to do it one more time. Victini V, not a good attacker, so you don't really want to attack with Victini V if you don't have to, which means they're likely to evolve into a VMAX and give you another pretty easy KO. But you're also beating Mew. Again, you're able to take advantage of those Genesects. We kind of talked about that already. You're losing the Suicune. You're getting hit for weakness. It's really tough. Plus, they don't even really need the Ludicolo at that point, right? Blizzard Rondo with full bench is going to do 440 damage, which is plenty. And then you lose to Urshifu and Teleon. Really, really tough. They're just really fast. Even if you do Crushing Hammer away a Rapid Strike energy, they can just kind of retreat and do all the stuff and hit you for 150 with Gale Thrust. Do it back-to-back turns, and next thing you know, you're Galarian Zigzagoon or an Inteleon ping away from getting knocked out. So really tough. They can also take advantage of putting a lot of pressure onto your bench with something like G-Max Rapid Flow. They can use Melanie to get back a water energy that you might have discarded or that they discard themselves with G-Max Rapid Flow, and then 2 turns in a row hit you for 120, maybe up to 180 on the bench. Really, really annoying to deal with. And that's pretty much everything. I mean, Victini obviously going to be neutral with itself. Calyrex, we talked about at the beginning of the video, it's going to hit you for weakness, which is why you're losing to it. So, what I really want to get away or get from this is what you can expect, but don't assume that these numbers are guaranteed, and they are not given to you. You still have to play, and you still have to make sure that you don't want to be the 1 in 10 chance that a deck has to win. You still have to play, you still have to show, and you still have to show up is really what I'm trying to say. That's going to do it for us today. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, found something informative. If you did, let me know by leaving a comment, like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. We talked about that at the beginning of the video. Enter the giveaway video in the video link in the description. Check it out. All you have to do is comment on another video. That simple to win. And yeah, we'll see you next time.